Welcome back. In this video, we'll start the process of sales on the My SME Manual. And the idea of this video is to give you practical tips, tools, and ideas to set up your sales process. I'm first going to jump over to a presentation that I prepared before we get over to the My SME Manual and start setting up our sales pitches. So sales is one of those topics that a lot of people get very nervous about, which is actually quite a thing that I've seen with my clients in the past. And I believe the biggest reason for that is the fear of rejection. That's really stopping small business owners from making a sale. Also because the majority part of that business owner is a technician. They don't really like people. They just want to do the practical work of the business. However, if you can't generate leads and if you can't convert a lead into a sale, which means you need a proper sales pitch, you will never be able to do your technical work. So it's a very important part of your business and should not be neglected. Right. So let's get cracking on the sales. I first want to say that sales is nothing other than a good product or service that a market segment needs. It's sold at an affordable price and it's communicated clearly. That in a nutshell is the simplicity of sales, and you shouldn't overcomplicate it. I want to share with you the process of communication, which is very important, and this goes straight through from the branding to the marketing to your sales pitch. How do you communicate with your target market? Firstly, you need to win their attention. Then you have to communicate your message, and lastly, they will trust you. Now, the thing that wins their attention is the emotional need. What does your target market need? That's the big question. Because if you can address their exact need, then you will win their attention. When you win their attention, you'll have a brief window of opportunity to communicate a clear message. If they trust the message that you communicate, then you'll be able to make a sale. The only way that they trust what you are saying at the end of the day is if it makes logically sense. Like if you touch on the emotions and you touch on the logic of your offering, then people trust you. Now that logic comes from the balance between the value I'm getting, which is the emotional need. What's the value I'm getting versus the price I'm paying? The moment that scale tips one way or the other, people lose trust. In other words, if the value is too much for the price, people want to know, why is this so cheap and I'm getting this incredible value? They feel like there's something dodgy happening, they lose trust. And vice versa. If the value is too light and the price is too heavy, people's going to say, no, this is way overpriced, I'm not going to buy from you. So that's probably the best way how I can describe this balance when it comes to sales. So ultimately it comes down to the emotional selling concept, the logical selling concept, and there's a couple of principles you can apply in your sales pitch, which I'll quickly take you through. Very important. I couldn't do this on the theoretical videos as it's a bit overwhelming. So I'd rather give it to you in this presentation form. The number one principle that you can apply. Now just note that not all 5 will necessarily be applicable for you. You need to look at these 5 principles and ask yourself which one fits in naturally with my business. So I would suggest you select 1 or 2 and try to encourage the sales in your business. So number 1, the principle of commitment and consistency. People have a huge bias or need to be consistent, and they want to act in ways that are consistent with their previous behaviors, actions, and verbal commitments. What triggers this need for consistency is a verbal commitment. So a quick experiment 2 professors did at Stanford in America. Both of them went to the beach. The one dressed up as a beach goer, and the other one dressed up as a druggie, homeless person, or a sketchy person. And the beachgoer went to the beach. He placed his towel in the proximity of other beachgoers. And it was obvious because they were trying to do an experiment. So he sat down, listened to his Walkman. Uh, After listening to a couple of songs, he puts his Walkman on his towel and apparently takes a long stroll on the beach. In comes the second professor dressed as the homeless person or the druggie. He steals the Walkman and he hurries away. Okay, now they ran the experiment 20 times, and incredibly, only 4 times of the 20 times somebody stopped the crime. The other 16 people looked the other way. You wouldn't believe it. And there's a reason for that: human behavior. Because they're not committed, they won't put themselves in harm's way, because that person could be carrying a knife, so I can get hurt. Nobody asked me to look at his stuff, so I'll rather just look the other way. They ran the experiment a second time, but this time with a twist. The person putting down the Walkman then would turn around, ask somebody to look at the Walkman, get a verbal commitment, and then went for a stroll on the beach. This time around, out of 19 people stopped the crime. They put themselves in harm's way because they verbally committed themselves, and they wanted to be seen as consistent. So what you got to ask yourself is, how can I drag out some sort of verbal commitment from my audience to get them to take action? Let's use the shoe example. I can, for instance, give the client a call and confirm with them an appointment in the shop for a shoe fitting. And if that person commits, he wants to be seen as consistent, so chances are pretty good that he's going to show up. Right. Secondly, there's another principle, the principle of reciprocity, and this principle states, or it's rather the practice of exchanging things with others for mutual benefit. In other words, a very good scenario would be a networking scenario. I'll never forget, the one day was the networking scenario, and the person asked me what I do, and I say, I've got My SME, we do business coaching, etc., etc. And he said, you know what, I've got somebody who needs your service. Give me your details, I'm going to ask them to give you a call. Immediately, without flinching, I thought to myself, wow, this is nice. How can I do a favor for this person in return because he just did me a great favor? So that's the second principle. The third principle is buying decisions. I've already spoken a bit about this when it comes to the Facebook and Google testimonials. People make buying decisions based on what other people think are good and correct. This decision is confirmed when we see people like us, the same culture or language, engaging in certain behaviors. So if I see somebody else that's like me in my culture that reviews another business 5 out of 5, I'm pretty confident that they can deliver the product or service, and I'll be willing to buy from them. The next principle is the principle of urgency. And the scarcity principle states that we assign worth to things based on how rare they are and how likely we are to potentially lose the opportunity to have them. Something in short supply seems therefore more valuable, and people are more afraid of the fear of losing something than the gains of receiving something. Let that sink in. In other words, if I see a jacket on special in summer, my brain immediately thinks, wow, I'm losing out on a great deal, rather than focusing on what I actually need now, which is not a jacket because it's summer. Incredible. So you can always use this principle by running a special with a limited time. For instance, 50% discount until Friday, but it must be a full payment. That's just an example. And then the last part of this principles that I want to touch on is to remove the red tape. And this is probably the most important one that you can apply in your sales. And this comes from the B equals MAT formula. B is behavior, equals M for motivation, A for ability, T for trigger. What it basically states is that every person's action is motivated. He has the ability to do it, and it's triggered by something. Let's say, for example, you watching this online business course. That's your behavior. Now, you might be motivated to watch it fully through because you're learning new knowledge and you can start or grow your business. You might have the ability, which means you could afford it, as well as you've got internet and a smartphone or a computer or a laptop device to do the course on. And the trigger was either you placed the order on the CPD formula in Canada, or you did a Google search, or you found us on Facebook, or you got us through Siabonga Africa or Love Howick, which is a non-profit company that does these courses through us. It might be any of the above. All right. Ultimately, when you do a sale with your client, you got to ask yourself, if the sale does not go through. Now, let's say the behavior is this middle line over here. The green is the sale is through, the red is the sale is not through. So if the sale is not through, you got to ask yourself, why not? Okay, and more or less, it's always going to be the ability or the motivation. If the motivation is low, you're not touching on your target market's need. So the person might say, it's not really something I need now, so I'm not going to continue. You got to ask yourself then, am I selling a need or a luxury? And if you can get your product that that the target market needs it, it's a different story, right? Then if the motivation is high, but the ability is low, then you're also not going to make a sale. Example, the person really wants to do the business coaching, but it's too expensive for them, so they can't. I got to find a way to make it affordable for them. So let's say the business coaching is 4,900 Rand over a 3-month period, so it's 4,900 per month. I can then say, you know what, if you can't afford 4,900, let's do 2,500 Rand for 2 sessions per month rather than 4,900 for 4 sessions per month. So now I'm stating the question to my client, can you do 2.5? The person's going to be like, yeah, sure, I can do 2,500 Rand. I just made a sale. All right, and then ability, is it accessible for the client? Yes or no? That's your next question. So that's how you remove the red tape. You really got to ask yourself, why is the sale not going through, and what can I do about it in order to make the sale? Okay, next, how do you structure a sales pitch? Very quickly, we're going to jump to the My SME Manual shortly where you can apply this. You structure your sales pitch by, first of all, connecting with your prospect and understanding probably the most important part of your sales pitch. You don't just want to sell anything to anyone. You want to understand your target market and what they need. Super important. Then you can go ahead and create a value proposition that makes sense. Find out what's blocking the sale. In other words, remove the red tape and apply sales principles like commitment and consistency to encourage and hurry the sale on. Okay, then next, there's 3 phases to making a sale. You've got your introduction phase. It's not just going to happen. You need to first of all make contact. Then you negotiate. This is where the FOC behavior model comes in, removing the red tape, and then you close the deal. And that's in a nutshell, more or less, how the sales system works. Just a quick example would be the intro phase could be, let's say, you've got an online company and you're selling a service. The intro phase is the first part where they fill in the application form and the auto email goes out. You send them an SMS, you give them a phone call, send them an email. That's the intro phase. Now you follow up in the next coming weeks to make sure that everything's on track and the client's continuing with the service until you close the deal. Right, in a nutshell, remember, people buy from people. So if you're a crappy salesman, it's not the end of the world. Go buy yourself this book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, because ultimately, if you work on your people skills, you're going to become a better salesman. I hope you enjoyed this video. We're going to quickly jump over to the My SME Manual at 3.5, where you're going to state which sales principle you will use for your sales pitch by stating yes or no. What's the emotional trigger going to be? And what's the packages that you're selling? Once you've got this in place, you're going to scroll down to 3.6.4 and work on your negotiation tactics. In other words, you got to identify the red tape. The first one is my client motivated or not? Number 1. Number 2, do they have the ability? Is it accessible for them to get my product or service? Yes or no? Number 3, can they afford it? yes or no, and then you state how you will implement the FOC behavior model within your sales pitch. Normally what I do is I'll just bluntly ask my client, can you afford the product or not? Do you need it or not? I'm very straightforward like that. You cut through the clutter, just be honest. People appreciate honesty. Okay, 3.6.5, your sales pitch. There's always an introduction phase, a main phase, and not a closing, but a next step. Very important. So your intro phase, let's say you're doing a sales pitch over the phone, where somebody fills in the application form on the website and you need to give them a phone call. Remember, within the first 15 seconds, people make their first impression. You don't want to tell the person, hi, Peter, this is Brent here from Formal Shoe. How are you doing? Blah, blah, blah. The person doesn't have time for that. Within the first 15 seconds, they're just trying to figure out who is calling them from this unknown number and why. So you want to say, hi, Peter, Brent here from Formal Shoe. I'm quickly following up regarding the application form you completed. Now Peter's going to say, yes, I was expecting your phone call. Great. You've won the attention. Congratulations. Now you have a brief window of opportunity to communicate your message. What's going to trigger the person? How will you explain it? In other words, what's the value proposition and what's the packages, your competitive advantage you're selling? Next steps. Okay, is anything blocking the sale? What principle can I apply? Do you want to come in for a shoe fitting on Thursday, get the person to commit, and then follow up afterwards? That's in a nutshell how I will create my sales pitch over the phone. Then you've got your sales pitch in person. Again, there's got to be some structure behind this. What's the main things you want to discuss? What's the next steps? And ultimately your elevator pitch as well. So complete these details, memorize it, understand it, that you are ready to make a sale when the time comes. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was insightful, and I will see you in the next video.